Okay, we are recording now, and good evening once again, and good afternoon to In Conservation with. My special guest tonight is Dr. Amy Jane Beer. Amy, if you're friendly with her, and if you're naughty, it's Dr. Amy Jane. Is that right?
Well, if I'm naughty, it's Amy Jane. I think I always feel like I'm being told off when people call me Amy Jane. So Amy, it's fine, thanks.
Okay, and just also to mention that tonight is being sponsored by by Leica Sport Optic. So thank you very much. And one other thing I want to say quickly is that I don't know about you, but you may see me getting a bit cross-eyed because I'm finding it. I'm getting Zoom eyes now at the moment. I'm doing so many Zooms, my eyes are just going all over the place. Anyway, Amy, thank you very much for coming tonight. May I ask you, how has your kind of lockdown been?
I think I'm over it now. I think we've all had more than enough of it now. But on the whole, we've been hugely fortunate in that we've all stayed well. We live somewhere where we haven't ever felt that we can't go out safely because we live in a very rural area. We can just sort of tumble out of the house into the woods. So that's been an absolute blessing. But homeschooling has been hard. That's the bit that's getting us down. I think it's hard on all of us, on as parents trying to teach, and on my son having his parents trying to teach him. It's not an ideal situation, and there are regular meltdowns on both sides. It's not the ideal.
Thing is, homeschooling is pretty tough when I think about it, because I couldn't imagine my mum and dad homeschooling me. I mean, it just would never have happened.
I wouldn't mind doing it if it was homeschooling by choice, but while we're doing the school's choice of work at home, that would be much better delivered by teachers. I have my ideas about what I'd like to teach my son, but his teachers are delivering lots of work that he needs to deliver back to them, and I don't know how to teach that. So yeah, particularly literacy. Modern literacy is driving me crazy. I've had a good rant about that.
Yes.
I was taught literacy in that way when I was young. I'm sure I wouldn't have become a writer. So I want the writers of tomorrow are going to come from with the stuff they have to struggle with, 8, 10. It's crazy.
Well, this sounds like a whole different subject actually to talk about.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I'm very good at digressing.
No, that's a good subject though. For those who are unfamiliar with Amy, I mean, Amy and I met. I've only ever physically met you once.
Well, twice. I was once in a queue when I was the nervous fan clutching a book for you to sign, and then once in real life, yes, when we actually properly spoke. Yeah. But we've met a few.
Sorry,
haven't we? We've met a few times online now in the last year.
Yeah, well, this is great. I'm delighted. Anyway, for those who are unfamiliar with Amy, just about to say Amy Jane, sorry, because you're not naughty yet. With Amy, let me just quickly break down what you're about in terms of at least your biog. We'll find out a bit more about you, obviously, in the ensuing minutes, but you live in the rural North Yorkshire, as you mentioned earlier. You're a biologist and a writer based there. You are a country diarist for The Guardian and a columnist for British Wildlife, and writes regularly for BBC Wildlife and other magazines. You've written a whole ton of books. You've written about 30 natural history books, reference books, but you're becoming better known for your more personal and creative nature writing and your campaigning, not least for the access to nature, equality in the nature sector, which is what we're going to be talking about predominantly tonight, and nature-friendly farming. You got a couple of books coming out soon. You got your next book, which will be A Tree a Day, which will be published later in 2021. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I've been reading the proofs today, so that's a good sign.
That's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you also got The Flow coming out in 2022, which, actually The Flow, a return to the river. Can you quickly tell us what that's about? Does that involve a lot of wild swimming?
Well, wild swimming is definitely mentioned. That is a book, a much more personal book than I've written before. Most of my previous books have been fairly straight natural history. The Flow is much more what you'd call new nature writing, if you want to put it in a box like that. So my personal experience of and with rivers of all kinds, but starting from the years in which I spent quite intensively whitewater kayaking around the British Isles and much further afield. So I had a very intense adrenaline-fueled relationship with rivers, which, as I've become slightly older and wiser, has mellowed into something where I don't necessarily feel the need to throw myself off waterfalls. I would rather be by them and maybe swim underneath them, maybe dive underneath them.
It's funny because I have a real issue with water. I'm actually a fairly strong swimmer. In fact, I remember when I first swam I did my first 10 yards. I was, I think, 11. I went to a Catholic boys' school and we were down at the pool, and I hated going to the public pools. But the convent were down there at the time, and the nun was teaching some girls how to swim. And she said, "You boy, show these girls how to swim 10 yards. And I was thinking, me? And I thought, I have to do it because I can't, So I jumped in the pool and I was so proud of myself swimming that 10 yards. The fact that I didn't invite the girls.
To be watching.
Exactly, it didn't matter to me. Yeah, you do a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about your writing for a second, actually. I love your writing style. I'm sure many of the Zoomers here are actually familiar with how you write and what you write about. I mean, I've been looking at some of your stuff because I've been snooping on you. I noticed that you've had a lot of haircut changes, different hairstyles over the years. And also in your publicity picture, you've got the same wellies as me. That's one thing I noticed as well. But I love the way you drop contemporary references into what you write about. I was reading something you were writing about, well, you mentioned owls, and you were speaking about the white owl droppings. This is one of your columns in The Guardian. White owl droppings under the owl boxes installed by your friend Robert Fuller. And you described them as rub between fingers. Those chalky droppings are smooth as a cosmetic cream. I wonder if they were ever used as a pigment. Sorry, let me get my glasses, sorry. I wonder if there's ever used as a pigment and resist the urge to run a streak across my nose like adamant. I thought it was quite funny. That was great.
That's me showing my age.
Yeah, but that was a great visual kind of sort of look at the droppings of an owl, which I've never seen described that way. So it was really quite interesting.
You'll have to rub them hard next time. They are incredibly smooth, like a bit sort of like talcum powdery made into a paste.
Yeah. You earned a doctorate studying sea urchins. Why did you sort of make the switch from being a scientist to a writer?
I think, like most people who go through the British education system, you come to a point where you are asked to choose your subjects at GCSE as it is now. It was O-level for me. And you are asked to kind of to choose between arts and sciences, or particularly at A-level. I think I was interested in science. There were only 3 subjects I was allowed to take, and it was very much discouraged to mix up. So I chose 3 sciences, and suddenly all the creative things that I've been interested in. I used to write a lot. I used to paint. I used to be quite creative as a child, but suddenly that door was sort of closed to me. And oh, you're a scientist now. So we kind of force young people to make a choice far too early. And in fact, it's not a choice they need to make at all. I think the best scientists are those that can be creative, and imagination is a hugely important part of science, and vice versa. Why shouldn't someone whose main interest perhaps is English or languages, or foreign languages, or history, not have some scientific understanding as well? I think a lot of the our gullibility in society, all this sort of fake news and all this conspiracy theories about the coronavirus, for example, come through people not being confident about the science. So yeah, I think we're forcing people to be too selective too soon. And so I got to how old was I? Probably into my 40s before, as a scientific writer, I was invited to go along to New Networks for Nature event, which is New Networks for Nature is an organisation I now sit on the steering group of, and they organise an annual event which specifically targets people whose creative or scientific endeavours are motivated by a love of nature. And so there's a huge variety of contributors there from across the board: poets, artists, photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, writers. And it blew my mind. I suddenly thought there is another way to write about nature. So I sort of discovered creative nature writing through that event, and it gave me the confidence to try it for myself. And when I did, I suddenly realised maybe that's what I should have been doing all along. It clicked with me. The release of being able to write about my feelings as well as about the,
Yeah, and I'm really happy that science, or should I say nature writing, is now more emotional than it was before, when it was very, in my view, quite twee and descriptive in scientific terms, but not in how it makes you feel. I mean, let's just dive straight into this. Do you feel that women now are encouraged to take up a sort of a course in life as a scientist, as a job in science, basically? Do you think that's something that's encouraged now? Because I remember when I was younger, it wasn't really the case, and I'm sure it wasn't for you either.
I went to an all-girls school, so I think we probably were given, we didn't have the option to take some subjects that were deemed very masculine, including sort of metalwork, woodwork, DT, that sort of thing. But we were encouraged to study science, and I guess there was no sense of being intimidated to enter a science class. If I'd been in a co-ed school where most of the people studying physics, for example, were boys, maybe that would have put me off a little bit. So I guess in some ways I was fortunate in that I didn't have that. It was always going to be all girls in that class. But I know that even among the sciences, there is this big disparity in the number of girls that are taking up biology compared to physics, for example. I think a lot of the caring professions, biology or human biology is a prerequisite. So I think even back in the 80s and 90s, when I was a student, there were a lot of girls taking those life science subjects. I think that's definitely changed. I think girls are much more actively encouraged in all STEM subjects, which is a very good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got a friend who works used to work for a scientific institute. I can't even mention the country because it might kind of pinpoint what the deal is now. But basically, she was a scientist working with other women scientists as well as men. And this institute claimed that it was a flat institute in terms of, the hierarchy. But it was men that were getting the better jobs, getting promoted. And in the end, I think about 9 women left as a result, including her, because they suddenly realized that actually this isn't as fair as it originally seemed. Is that something, do you think that is kind of a bit harsh in terms of what happened there? Or does it happen in the UK? But
no, I think it does happen, and not just in the nature sector or the science sector. I think having true equality is not about having a figurehead that's a female, that's a woman or a man. It's not about being able to point to the person that proves the rule, if you like, the exception that proves the rule. It's about having equality right through the stack. So there should be equality among CEOs, among politicians, among leaders of all sorts, but also in the middle ranks, and also across the board there should be equality of opportunity, and that we still don't have. The environmental sector is one of the least diverse in terms of ethnic makeup as well. So we need to be looking across the board at being properly representative of of all of society, because we're missing a trick if we don't do that. Everything works better when you've got equality.
Do you think, in terms of nature writing, do you think there's equality there? Because I've had quite a few now, female and male nature writers, but I always ask the female ones, how do you feel? How is it as a writer? Are you treated any differently? And also, do you think, and this is a question I ask everyone, do you think that there is a different style of writing when it comes to male and female? Are females more, you mentioned it earlier slightly, more kind of emotional about the subject?
I think more emotional writing about nature has become more popular. So possibly that is a reason that more women writers are being published. There have always been plenty of us. This idea that there aren't many women writing about nature is complete rubbish. There are loads, and loads of people doing it absolutely brilliantly. So it's not for want of the talent and the raw material being there. That's definitely already there in spades. But the track record of publishers in seeking out those talents has not been great. But it's changing dramatically, and I firmly believe that in 5 years' time, when you go into your local bookshop, that table that has all the nature writing on will probably be, if not equal, then potentially more books there by women. There are so many brilliant writers that are just starting to get published. I'm really, really encouraged by that. And in terms of different styles of writing, different voices, I think that there's room for all of that. However you view nature and whatever your relationship with nature is, you're not going to be the only one that feels that way. And so, yes, in the past, we've had this very sort of traditional idea of nature writing, initially, straight natural history, which for some people, that's what they still want. I've had some interesting conversations with a few people who don't hold new nature writing at all, and they'd much rather just have a serious book about a serious subject that's going to tell them the information that they want to know. And that's great, but there is plenty of that out there. So the more emotional, the more personal nature writing is something that other people find helps them connect, and maybe gives them not confidence exactly, but gives them the sense that the way they feel about nature is acceptable. And we're getting away from that idea that in order to be serious about nature, you have to be able to go out there and identify every bird by its call, for example, and you have to spend all your weekends, all your spare time on a nature reserve in a hide, studying your species of choice. That's just not true. And for a lot of us, the time that I can actually spend seriously watching nature is very, very limited. So most of my encounters with nature are just in the process of day-to-day life. They are when I go out to the compost heap, or when I take my son to school, or when I'm walking the dog, or in a car park somewhere, I'll notice waxwings or something like that. It's just part of everyday life, rather than something I go out specifically to do as though it's going to a football match or something. It's not. Nature isn't a hobby. Nature should be just part of the weft of life. And there's a lot more writing that acknowledges it in that way now.
Yeah, but when it comes to actually being out in the field, as you mentioned, is there a difference? Because I've noticed, for example, and I'm sure many other people may have noticed this too, but it's sometimes the men that are quite obsessed, that are able to go off and spend days out in the field, or drop everything and rush off if they're in a relationship, to rush off and twitch something. And women have always been, I suppose, at a disadvantage because they're left holding the baby, really. What do you feel about that?
I think that's certainly true. A couple of years ago, when I was talking about this at Bird Fair, I did a sort of very unscientific Twitter survey of asking women specifically what they felt, what were the reasons they didn't spend as much time in nature or watching nature as they would like to. And that idea of guilt, lack of time, but also guilt about the time they did spend away from their families or their job or whatever other duties was immense. And that seems to be something that women felt a lot more than men do, possibly because it feels different. You know, going right back to the day when, you know, the men would withdraw to smoke after dinner and or go down to the club together or the pub together, and the women would be engaged with more domestic parts of life. I guess it's kind of it's part of that same societal structure that's given us that sort of history, that very old-fashioned way of looking at things. So yeah, I think we could definitely drop the guilt, the feeling that we should be doing something else, because those little bits of time, and they are often very short bits of time, are precious, and you can get so much from them. And well, I don't know about other people listening, but I'm a better person after I've been out and had a dose of nature. So it's better for everybody if I go out there and readjust, rebalance.
You got a young son, so what was it like when he was, you know, a baby and a toddler? How did that affect your access to the environment?
Certainly, I didn't venture very often into a bird hide with him. Once or twice, in trepidation, because he was bound to make too much noise or need his nappy changing or something like that. But in general, being with a very young child is fantastic. When they're very small, they're very portable, so you can take them pretty much anywhere. And that toddler age, they force you to slow down. Going for a walk with someone who's newly on their feet, you know, they walk at an absolute snail's pace, and they stop to look at everything. They want to pick up every leaf, they want to prod every pebble, they want to look at every flower, and that makes you look anew. So I found it really opened my eyes, actually, to rediscover that child's way of looking at nature, just the sheer wonder of it, and the fact that every step there is something new to astound you if you properly look. Yeah, it was really eye-opening. I'd recommend it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I once led a walk in Wormwood Scrubs, my local patch in West London, for some ladies at lunch, maybe 11 women. And I was walking them around, and it's quite interesting, the urban, well, I don't know whether if I should brand all urban people like this, but it was like, oh, don't step there, it's dirty. Oh, I'd never let my son go in that bit there, you know, it'll catch germs. You know, you obviously are very well versed and understand the whole scenario, but surely you're in a minority.
Probably am still in the minority. You know, I think a bit of dirt is really, really good for you. My mum certainly believed that, and I've never lived in a particularly clean and tidy house. And I think there are children suffer with so many allergies now, and a lot of them I think probably are related to having an immune system that isn't challenged enough. You know, in small, minor, everyday ways. I think what's the old saying? A peck of dirt does you good, and I think that's very true. My son's been grubbing around in the mud since he was a baby. Our house is full of spiders, and when he'd first learned to crawl and would sort of disappear off into corners of the room that didn't get cleaned very often. And when he emerged one day with grey, dusty spider's webs hanging from his mouth where he'd been eating them, I thought maybe I should do something about cleaning those corners. But it didn't seem to do him any harm. I'm sure it's primed him in some way. Hopefully, you know, he seems to have a fairly robust immune system.
Yeah, I'm sure. You were going to have a little read of something, weren't you?
Yes, I'll read you a little bit of. This was a
That doesn't sound very rehearsed, does it?
Country diary. That's we did speak about this earlier. That I wrote this time last year. I thought it was fairly seasonal and might be a little bit pertinent to the discussion we're having about the part that motherhood plays in my writing. It's called Winter Lights. We usually leave the bedroom curtains open, and from my pillow these last few clear nights, I've watched Sirius, the dog star, carving the same shallow arc across the southern sky past our window. It flashes green, white, gold, blue, red in rapid, arrhythmic succession. There's no apparent order to the colours, but the sequence is so fluent it seems like code. I can't help feeling that if my mind were only capable of closer attention, there's a message waiting to be deciphered. Perhaps I've seen too many of those time-lapse photographs that make the night sky look like a vinyl LP revolving around the spindle of the North Star. Perhaps I'm half dreaming, but I can hear music pulsing out from Sirius's bright needle. Not a twinkling lullaby, but clattering big bang jazz, loud and arcane, heavily syncopated. No wonder I can't fall asleep. No wonder these scintillations were once thought to wilt crops and drive dogs and women mad. The sky stayed clear come morning, and as my son had a day off school for staff training, we went mountain biking in Dolby Forest. Pine resin and exertion clear my brain. At nearly 9 years old, the boy is faster than me, especially on the swooshy descents. The rule is that he waits at the bottom of each downhill section until I catch up. But halfway round, he skids to an unexpected additional stop where the trail weaves among mixed conifer and beech. The sun is low, the trees jewelled with droplets of thawed frost. And through these countless watery lenses, quivering in barely perceptible currents of air, the forest winks and flashes at us. We've seen this before, he and I, in this same forest. The first time when he was 3 or 4 years old, on a morning when the whole place looked like Narnia. He remembers immediately. Look, Mummy, there are the fairy lights again. That, of course, is exactly what they are. Real fairy lights, no wires, no batteries required. They flash, green, white, gold, blue, red, in rapid succession. Only now the message is abundantly clear, just for us, and we stand a while watching and grinning at each other.
It's fabulous. Very evocative.
Yeah, and I've had some lovely moments like that where we have kind of just bonded out there, not over any sort of serious nature study, just little moments that I will always treasure, and he's probably forgotten most of them, but he'll remember. He'll have his own memories that are special. But I love that story about Sirius, the dog star, which tends to rise. So at this time of year, I'm seeing it at bedtime, but in the summer, I think it's more apparent in the morning. And I think the Romans used to believe that it would wilt your crops and it would drive the women mad if they were too exposed to it. And so that idea that women are somehow histrionic and susceptible to strange influences that might explain our behavior in some way to puzzle mankind is a pervasive one still. And I think we're still trying to kind of show that sometimes we do respond differently to a set of circumstances, but that doesn't mean that we've gone mad or that there's anything wrong with us. It's just a slightly different perspective. And the more different perspectives, the better. If we can understand, the more perspectives we can understand and listen to and pay attention to, then the better we'll understand the world and our place in it.
Yeah, I suppose that all during the ages, women who have kind of been in touch with nature and who, I suppose, to men looked as if they were soothsayers or, some kind of weird person.
Yeah,
they've all been called witches, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
In time, and ended up being burnt to the stake,
Mm-hmm.
burnt at the stake even. I was telling you earlier, before we recorded, that I've kind of met up with a couple of witches in my time recently, including one lady in Spain, actually, in Pamplona, who used to love, she's an artist, art teacher at school, but she used to love being in the forest and painting these dark sort of images of trees. And it's interesting how people, when it's dark, they think, oh, it's got to be evil. When in reality, it's just a reflection of life, isn't it? It's just, dark and light is life.
You can't appreciate the light if you don't know the dark. And I think the dark times that we've been living through in the last year have set into a really sharp contrast. The light, even the small, light, bright incidents in life, particularly those that nature give us, have seemed so much clearer and so much more powerful, more colourful, and we appreciate them so much more because we've seen the dark. You know, losing loved ones makes you appreciate all that they were, and why do we have to lose things or risk losing them before we start to appreciate them? That goes for all of nature, of course. I think, you know, biodiversity loss is hitting home, and for those of us that already know and love nature, it's compelling us to hold it even closer and push even harder to save it.
Do you think that if women were in charge of the world, if there was a woman in the White House, and, you know,
there is now.
Yeah, but top, I'm not talking about top, and more women generally in governments around the world, do you think we'll be in this situation now, or do you think that women would have handled this a bit better?
Well, I know there's been quite a lot of interest in looking at the countries that do have female leaders, and how they have handled the pandemic. And on the face of it, it looks like those countries have done very well. I mean, you know, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Angela Merkel's done a great job. The Icelandic and Finnish prime ministers are both women. They've done well. So yes, that's very interesting. But I think we also have to realise that societies that have elected women as leaders generally have better gender balance throughout the stack. As I was saying earlier, it's not just about that figurehead. I think, you know, that they've proved that women make great leaders, and some of the qualities of leadership that we haven't valued enough in the past are those stereotypically female ones of empathy and compassion, and a sort of more almost a kind of mothering approach to leadership, which is not just care and compassion, but also that ability to say a loving no. You know, I'm sorry, you can't have that. You know, this is how you have to act at the moment. And all parents have had that experience with their children, where you're having to sort of tell them things they don't want to hear, but you're doing it for the right reasons and for their own good. And I think possibly some of the female leaders have been slightly better at delivering that message. Certainly, Boris Johnson seems incapable of delivering that firm, I'm sorry guys, you know, this is really tough, but take, you know,
Yeah,
but it's for the best. He just can't bring himself to do it. But I think, you know, saying that having a female leader would solve all our problems, I think is dangerous, because, you know, there are women and there are women, just as there are men and there are men. Different. There's a spectrum in each sex, and yeah, it's more about the society. A society that has gender equality is more likely to, or has greater gender equality, is more likely to elect a female leader. And I think that's partly why we're seeing the benefit through society. You know, in a society where there's a female leader, there are likely to be female leaders in industry, and in, you know, in all other sectors as well. So it's not just about putting a figurehead at the top. It's got to be right the way through.
I mean, I've always been of the mind that it would be a better world, actually, personally. And I hear what you're saying, but I kind of feel it would be, because in my life, I mean, for example, when I used to work in an office, my best managers, my best bosses have always been women. And I'm surrounded by women now when I think about it, because my agent's a woman, you know, my PA is a woman, you know, I've got women all around me. And I think it's interesting because I feel that it's more measured, there's more attention to detail, all that sort of stuff. I actually do think there's a gender difference, because sometimes when I work with men, it's very competitive at times, you know. I mean, I agree with you, there's women out there who are very competitive too, and, you know, not very good.
And I think maybe those qualities that you're talking about, attention to detail, for example, I think there is a case that women have to try a bit, in the way things are at the moment, women have to try harder in order to get to the same level as men. So it's not really surprising to find that successful women have, you know, are very good at attention to detail. They can't afford to make a mistake. their mistakes will be judged more harshly than those of their male counterparts. So I think it's not necessarily that that's a particular trait of female of women, that they are better at detail than men across the board. I suspect that they've just worked a lot harder on getting that right, and that, you know, that's not right. They shouldn't have to, should they? But unfortunately, that is the case.
Have you ever been a victim of sexism yourself in your career?
When I was applying for PhDs, I studied my degree in biology was at Royal Holloway, part of the University of London, and I wanted to stay on. I realised that, you know, biology was going to be my thing, so I started applying for PhD positions, and applied for one at Cambridge, and I went along to an interview, and it was a neurobiology PhD. I was interested in that at the time, and the academic who would have been the supervisor for that post, I was ushered into his lab, and he was sitting at the far end of the lab by the window with his back to me, the bench, and he didn't turn around. He just beckoned me over, and he had two buckets in front of him, and one of these buckets was cheeping, and it was full of the chicks that he was working on. He studied the development of chick brains, and he was cutting their heads off with a pair of kitchen scissors, and putting the heads in one bucket, gathering the brain tissue, basically. Now I knew full well what this doctorate would involve that I was applying for, and that we would be studying chick tissue. Anyway, he conducted the first part of the interview there while he was doing this. And then he took me to his office and did the interview proper. And he said, I always do that for the girls because I want to make sure you're not going to cry. And I was like, do you mean, you know, you interview people differently? Oh, yes. And I was, well, he did offer me the PhD, and I didn't take it. I ended up studying sea urchins back at Royal Holloway where I'd started out. And that was very much the right decision for me. But just that idea that having an emotional response to doing something like that, I think, you know, if you're studying, if your study requires you to take the life of an animal and you don't feel something when you do it, then possibly you shouldn't be doing that research. If you value life, you know, so little, and if your emotion expresses itself as tears, then I don't see a problem with that either. But and this was a long time ago. This was in the 90s, early 90s. So I don't think anyone would get away with that now in a British institution anyway. But yeah, I guess that changed the direction of my career potentially. You know, it was a big decision for me where I would go and study next. So yeah, that was sexist.
Yeah, sounds it. Do you think, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that there's plenty of women now getting involved in the sciences. And also, you know, when I go birding, for example, or when I'm out in the field, I'm seeing more women. I'm not seeing many more ethnically diverse people, but that's another subject. Related, but another subject. I go to America and there's loads of women. In fact, probably more than 50%.
Yeah, birding is really, there's loads of women into birding in the States, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, we've got some people from the States here. Maybe later on they can tell us more about that. But what struck me is the fact that I find that there's a lot of women who are afraid to put their heads above the parapet. So, for example, speaking about birds, I've noticed, even as an organizer of a festival myself, that it's sometimes harder to get a woman to come and talk because they feel, oh, I don't know enough. I've had that back at me. And also I've noticed in the field, I mean, a couple of years ago and maybe before then, but certainly since then, there's been a lot of stuff on social media about how women have been treated in the field and how they're made to feel inadequate and you don't know enough and all that sort of stuff. do you have any thoughts on that? Because for me, that seems to be quite a big issue. I know quite a few female birders who actually, they know their stuff, but they don't want to sort of say anything. They want to keep out of the limelight, so they don't want to get involved in the competition.
Yeah, I think, well, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about imposter syndrome, and I think that there is an element of that, and you feel like an imposter if you are put into a setting where you feel that your face or your experience or your qualities don't fit. But when that happens, then it's probably not something that's wrong with you, it's something that's wrong with that setting. If the setting doesn't recognize what you can bring to it. So whether that setting is a bird hide, or whether it's a theatre full of people listening to nature writers talking, or conservationists talking. And I know a lot of women who do feel anxious about being invited to speak, because take bird fair as an example. A few years ago, you know, it was quite difficult to find women who were you could listen to. They just weren't putting them up on stage, and the organisers told me on more than one occasion that, you know, they tried to ask women, and the women often said no. But then you look at the audience, and I think to be put up in front of an audience that don't look like you in some way, or don't resemble you in some way, is quite intimidating, because you just automatically imagine that their experience, if not their expertise, but their experience is going to be different to yours. And that's not making a quality judgment on the quality of your experience and theirs. They're just different. And so if people, it's easy to imagine that they're expecting something that isn't what you can deliver. And I think the most empowering thing you can say to someone in that case, when you're asking them to speak, is that, you know, it's your experience that we're interested in. It's your different perspective. It's your ideas. Because, you know, we all know ourselves. We all know our own experience, and it's really, really easy to talk about what you know and love. What's difficult is to be asked to talk about something that you know a bit about, but you suspect other people know more about. So if you're honest about your experience, you know, I'm often asked to talk about birds, and I feel really awkward because I'm not a birder. You know, I just don't have the years and years of practice identifying birds from a glimpse. You know, I love the birds I encounter, and it's a very intense experience for me when I'm watching them. But I don't have that sort of almost magical ability to identify them on sight. And so that makes me feel inferior to almost any other birder I go out with. But it's also marvelous, because there's always something to learn from going out with someone else who's more expert than you. And I think just getting comfortable with your own ignorance is a really, really good thing. I am fully comfortable with my own ignorance at the moment, and it means that I can, you know, I always go out expecting to learn something.
It's a great attitude. Well, another thing I like about you, Amy, is that in your professional life, you cover several bases. You know, you write books, you write articles in magazines, you ghostwrite, you're an editor, you do book reviews, you do lots of stuff. And I think that's a really good way of actually, you know, spreading your eggs and giving yourself more of a chance of you know, gaining work and stuff. What advice would you give to a young person, or even an older person coming into this game, in terms of, you know, persevering and trying to make a mark?
Yeah, I definitely would advise trying to keep it fairly broad, particularly as a freelancer, because you never know quite where your next bit of work coming from. I made a mistake fairly early on in my freelance career of taking on a couple of big projects for a publisher who then went bust. And they hadn't paid me for a load of work I'd done, and I'd also cleared my diary in order to complete the rest of the project. So, you know, I ended up losing a huge amount of money, a huge amount of my time, because I'd committed completely to that one job. I guess it's the equivalent of just being suddenly made redundant. Yeah, since then I've done as you say, a good spread of different types of work. And it's good mentally as well. It keeps you sharp if you're having to jump around a little bit. So I still do quite a lot of scientific editing for biologists who have English as a second or third language sometimes, and so they're submitting scientific papers which are nearly always published in English. So it's a serious challenge for them to express often, very specific scientific points in a language which isn't their own. So they often have to take on the services of a native English scientist to edit their work before it goes off to before it's submitted to journal. I enjoy that. That keeps me sharp. It also it's the hardest thing I do by a long way. I can feel my brain melting quite often when I'm trying to do it, but it gives me a bit of a backstop. Any kind of creative career is a bit uncertain, so it's good to have something that you can fall back on if you need to, for just that little bit of security. But I enjoy the variety generally. I enjoy writing for different groups, different people. It's a bit like acting, I think. I write with lots of different voices. So the voice might be, oh wow, isn't this fun and exciting, or a serious, this is interesting for these scientific reasons, or a more campaigning tone, or something that's just pure kind of wonder, and sometimes pure silliness. There's got to be a bit of that as well. There's always room for some levity, I think.
What is your process when it comes to writing? I mean, you've written a truckload of books. I'm always in envy, but in a nice way, of people who can just knock books out like that. How do you do it? Do you find it easy, or is it one of those situations where you have to work at it in terms of
God, it really varies. It really varies. So a lot of the books I've written early on were straight natural history, and they're quite often part of a series that I've written a lot of books that have been published in the States, but as part of their schools and libraries. They have this huge schools and libraries sector of their publishing industry over there, because it's such a vast country. Just the market for schools and libraries is huge, and so they produce a lot of these sort of compendiums of encyclopedias of this, that, and the other. Loads of encyclopedias of animals of the world, or endangered species, or just scientific sort of multi-volume sets. And so they need people that can just sort of deliver 6 or 7 volumes on on mammals or whatever. So there's a lot of that, and that was very much writing to a structure that was already established. And so you're pretty much told, right, we need 360 words on this and 520 words on this. So it's quite a sort of mechanical task in a way, but brilliant for just filling your head with all the information that for some reason with me seems to stick there. So quite and good for the discipline of writing as well, knowing that you've got to complete X chapters by the end of the week. Really kind of makes you knuckle down. But that, I think that's helped me now, and that I'm quite a fast, even with the creative stuff, I'm quite a fast writer. Once I've got the idea, I can sit down and on a good day I'll write 3,000 or more words. But that's not to say I have good days all the time, but there are plenty of days where I write 50 and and they're all rubbish. But there is a discipline there that that's a muscle you can exercise. So I guess I'm fortunate in having come up through doing that sort of writing. But as how I write now, the more creative stuff, I write on the hoof a lot, talking into my phone when I'm out. I'm not very good at using notebooks. I know that sounds like heresy for a nature writer to say, or any kind of writer. We're supposed to have pockets stuffed with notebooks that are full of sketches and detailed notes. I don't do that. I use my phone, and I take voice notes, because I can much more quickly put a concept, I record a concept by just as a stream of consciousness. As soon as I start writing it, I start crafting it, and I don't want to do that. So I've got some really, really embarrassing voice notes out of all sorts of rubbish ideas that I've had while I've been out. But usually there's something that while I'm talking to myself, I'll almost hear myself say it as though it hasn't come from me. I can be very relaxed when I'm recording that way. I don't have to. Yeah, I hear it as though someone else has said it sometimes and think, oh, okay, that's the germ of an idea, and that's where, you know, the next piece will come from.
Okay. Do you think, actually, what time is it? It's actually, yes, we've got time. Do you think you could have remained as a biologist and not actually touched writing at all?
God, that is a really good question. I guess that there is writing, even if you're a research biologist, you're going to be writing papers and the like. But I think I just struggled with the focusing on one thing. I mean, I know research careers can kind of drift over different areas over the course of, you know, a whole career. But in those few years where I was doing my PhD, I found I was constantly knocking on doors, looking in other labs, peering over people's shoulders, looking down their microscopes instead of my own, because it was all just so cool and so interesting. I wanted to know it all. So being a writer and writing about other people's hard-won discoveries and insights was much better. So I guess I'm a lazy biologist. I just want the information. I want the results and not the graft, because it is bloody hard work. Just, you know, eking away, scraping away at the coal face of research is agonizingly slow sometimes. I'm not patient enough. So no, I don't think I could have stayed doing that.
Stacey Gorman in the Zoom room asked what made you get into biology in the first place. She said she wanted to be a marine biologist when she was at school, but got no guidance and left in 1994. It's interesting, Stacey, because I myself went to a crap school in London, in Harlesden. And I wanted, it wasn't cool to be studious at all. It's quite the opposite, but I wanted to become a vet. And I think I've told this story before, so please, Zoomers, if you heard it before, please, this is the time you can go make a cup of tea. But basically, I wanted to be a vet, and I remember going to a careers evening with my mum and saying to the careers teacher, you know, he actually asked me, you know, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be a vet. And he said, yes, well, you know, you're going to be studying longer than you would be to be a doctor. I think that you should be a carpenter or a bricklayer. And then that was it. My dreams were crushed. So anyway, what made you get into biology?
I guess two people really. One was my mum, who was very interested in wildlife, and the other was David Attenborough.
The Don.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching. My dad was in the army, so we travelled around quite a bit when I was young, and we lived in Germany when Life on Earth came out, and I just remember that iconic the book with the tree frog on the cover, and that program. We were able to watch it on the British Forces. We had our own TV channel over there then, which was just a few hours a day of English TV. And that was one of the things that was on. So I guess, you know, there were limited things to watch, and that was what was there. So I vividly remember watching that. And then around the age where I really started to decide, okay, this is something that I'm probably interested in, was probably when I was about 10, and we'd moved back to the UK. We were living in Warminster in Wiltshire, which and the army base there is right on the edge of Salisbury. And so my sister and I had an extraordinary amount of freedom to just roam over what is basically wilderness, kind of bombed wilderness. But you know, we were savvy enough to know that if there was a red flag flying, then they were probably blowing things up on the ranges or firing, and we wouldn't go there that day. But the rest of the time we would go and explore. And so we had a lot of freedom, certainly a lot more than most children do now. And massively more, particularly than that young girls would have now. I think there is part of the problem that we've got for careers in natural history is that parents don't feel safe letting their daughters roam free and wild and to make their own discoveries. And that's really sad. I know a lot of adult women don't feel comfortable going out by themselves. And it's tragic. I couldn't do my job if I wasn't going out by myself. Much as I love company and I love humans are up there with my favorite species. If you're going to properly pay attention to other species, you need to be by yourself.
Yeah. Well, Stacey Gorman, hang around, because in the Q&A you got a couple more questions that maybe you can ask for yourself. But we've come to the point in the evening where, and it's come really quick actually, for me I just felt like we just scratched the surface. We're just about to dive in deep and suddenly the alarm bell rings, it's time up. May I ask you, what is your favorite invertebrate?
It's very appropriate actually, because your last guest was ATM, street art with Mark, wasn't he? So this is a little postcard of his absolutely magnificent Tansy Beetle. Now the Tansy Beetle is a bit of a local speciality. I live just outside York, and until quite recently, the banks of the River Ouse, just a mile or two up and downstream of York, were the only place in the country where you could see these absolutely stunning, shiny green beetles. They're very easy to find when you know where to look, because they feed avidly on tansy, and they have two times a year when you can find them. And when you find them, they're nearly always having sex. So you normally find two for the price of one. The shiny bonking beetles of York, they are, these guys. Anyway, Mark, when we had a conference up here for the New Networks for Nature group that I was telling you about earlier, it was the first time it had come to York, and I wanted to sort of do something to mark it. And we thought getting Mark along to paint one of his fantastic murals would be a good way to do it. And once we'd had that idea, then it was a complete no-brainer that it should be York's Tansy Beetle. It's known as the Jewel of York, and they are jewel-like. Their elytra, their wing cases, were once collected and used as sequins for ball gowns and stalls and the like, which is awful, but you can see why people wanted to do it, because they are stunningly beautiful. So yes, that's my invertebrate, the Tansy Beetle.
Fantastic. Let me also ask you, if you could be anywhere on this planet, notwithstanding the current terrible pandemic, where would you be right now?
I would be on the Isles of Scilly.
Any particular island?
St Agnes. Yeah, it's my favourite. Been there as a child. We had a holiday there that was very influential on me, and since I've been back, as a student, and then several times with my family. And actually, what day is it today? Monday. On Saturday, we've booked this summer's excursion, so we're going back in August. Fingers crossed, we're going back in August anyway. If COVID permitting, we will be there again.
Good for you. Well, I hope you do make it. Okay, just to let you know, Zoomers, that we've got a few more guests coming up. Two have actually been confirmed, are on the website now. The next one's actually on Thursday, the 11th of February. And my phone's been going mad tonight for some reason. And he's a fellow scientist. His name is Graham Appleton. I've known him for a long time, but basically waders are his thing, shorebirds. And we're going to be talking about why some of them, if not most species, are a cause for concern. So we'll be talking about that on Thursday the 11th. And on Monday the 8th of February, actually I'm going back in time. On the 8th of February, next Monday, we have Lucy Jones, another writer. She's written a couple of books, and we're going to be talking about nature and mental health, which is a very important subject that has to be spoken about, definitely. So we'll be talking about that. So, Amy, thank you again for agreeing to come along and chat with me on In Conservation With. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, thank you anyway.
Yes, sorry, I was just waiting you to finish. No, thank you very much for having me, and for doing all that you've been doing over the last year to just keep us all sane by but just your lovely social media presence has been one of the things keeping me going, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can say the same about yours as well. And Zoomers, thank you very much for attending tonight. It's really great to see all of you. Hope to see you again. Please, if you have any comments in terms of testimonials, will be good. But any comments regarding the conversations, please let us know, email or leave something in the chat. And take care of yourselves, and don't forget the immortal words, keep looking up.